Pixar, a company that literally revolutionized the world of animation. From their technological breakthroughs to their quality storytelling, they have set a precedent for animated movies and continue to hold that standard to this day. It was not an easy path though. There was even a point when the company was sold off due to lack of profits. But through it all, they have maintained their integrity and have an impressive reputation because of it. So let's take a closer look at the history of Pixar. For the record, there's an official documentary called The Pixar Story. It's incredibly well made and has first-hand accounts from people involved in the creation and shaping of Pixar. It was made in 2007 though, so quite a few things have happened since then. Also, it's not available on YouTube. So think of my video as an updated, condensed version of this, but you should all still check it out. It's really good. When I researched the history of Pixar, I was amazed at how many prestigious people were involved in its formation. George Lucas, Steve Jobs, the Tropicana mascot. I'm not kidding. Pixar has a rich and fascinating history. It's also somewhat complicated and gets messy here and there. So we are going to start things off with the guys who founded Pixar, Ed Catmull and Alvy Smith. In 1974, these two attended the New York Institute of Technology. There, they were involved in a group called the Computer Graphics Lab. Their goal was to explore and trailblaze the world of computer graphics. But in 1979, a certain famous director invited these guys over to join the computer division of Lucasfilm. George had quite the wish list for the computer division: a digital film editing system, a digital sound editing system, a laser film printer, and the continued exploration of the world of computer graphics. In 1982, the computer division worked alongside Industrial Light and Magic and created a sequence called the Genesis Effect. It appeared in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan and was a huge milestone for computer animation.
The reformed moon simulated here represents the merest fraction of the Genesis potential.
Time to switch over to another person who had a tremendous impact on Pixar: John Lasseter. John has always been a fan of both animation and Disney, so it only made sense for him to pursue a career at Disney's animation studio.
When I was in high school, I found this book, this old ratty book, called The Art of Animation. And it was about the Disney studios and how they made animated films. And it was one of those things that just dawned on me. People make cartoons for a living. They actually get paid to make cartoons. I thought, that's what I want to do.
He quickly rose to the top and was receiving praise for his creative short films. After graduating from Cal Arts, John was hired by Disney Animation and landed his dream job. After experimenting a bit with computer animation, John got approval to make the movie The Brave Little Toaster. He was excited because this was a prime chance to test the blending of traditional and computer animation. After 8 months of development, the project was presented to the head of the studio, Ed Hansen.
So we got the presentation together. He walks in with Ed Hansen, and he had this scowl on his face from the beginning. No laugh. We pitched the whole thing. And he stood up and he asked, well, how much is this going to cost? I said, well, it's with computer animation. It's going to be, no more than the regular budget of a film. And he went, the only reason to do computer animation is if we can do it faster or cheaper. And he walked up and he walked out. And it was like, what? And so about 5 minutes later, I get this call. And Ed Hansen calls me down to his office. And I come down, and he said, well, John, your project is now complete, so your employment with the Disney Studios is now terminated.
John lost his dream job, and things looked pretty dark. But funny enough, this set things in motion for him. In 1983, John met Ed Catmull at a conference, and they spoke about their passion for computer animation. This led to John getting hired by Lucasfilm. The computer division at Lucasfilm had plenty of people who understood and loved animation, but they weren't technically animators, and that's why they picked up John. He was a professional animator, and they put him to good use. In 1984, the team created The Adventures of Andre and Wally-B and broke ground with new technical innovations, motion blur, new flexibility, and character action.
I loved working with these guys, and I kept challenging them. And then I was so inspired by all the work that they were doing. So it's become this way of working that the art challenges technology. Technology inspires the art.
In 1985, John worked with Bill Reeves to create the stained glass knight in Young Sherlock Holmes. It was another massive step forward, and the world of computer animation only continued to grow. Ed's team eventually created the Pixar image computer. It was incredibly powerful and helped to transform high-resolution imagery into 3D. They sold this software to the medical industry and the government as well, but it wasn't making enough money. This led to George Lucas selling his computer division. Ed and Alvy asked George if they could spin off the division, and he was cool with it. This allowed them to keep their team together. They decided to call their new company Pixar and began to search for new investors. Enter Steve Jobs, the financial savior of Pixar. As most of us know, Steve was involved with the rise of the Apple computer, but he eventually left the company and found himself talking to the fellas over at Pixar.
So Alan and I hopped in a car and rode up to Lucasfilm.
So on the limousine ride up there, I explained to Steve what these guys were, what their history was, what the potential was. Then a very good thing happened.
That was the first time I met Ed, and he shared with me his dream to make the world's first computer animated film. And I, in the end, ended up buying into that dream, both spiritually and financially.
So in 1986, Steve Jobs bought Pixar from Lucas for $5 million and became CEO of the company. He then invested $5 million more to see what they could do. One of the first projects to come from the new company was a short film called Luxo Jr. It was the first computer animated film to be nominated for an Academy Award. This short film inspired the people over at Pixar, as it represented the potential future of their studio, hence why the lamp is the mascot of the company. A batch of other short films were to follow. Red's Dream, Tin Toy, Knick Knack, Pixar was making some incredible progress, but it wasn't necessarily paying the bills. Its hardware division was struggling and would eventually be sold off. In order to survive, Pixar hired some new talent: Andrew Stanton and Pete Docter. Their team would work on different television commercials, such as Tropicana, Listerine, and Trident. In the late 1980s, Pixar had a stroke of luck as Disney reached out to them to collaborate on a project. Both companies worked on the development of CAPS, aka the Computer Animation Production System. It would help to reduce labor costs for ink, paint, and post-production processes. This collaboration was just the beginning for both Pixar and Disney, but Disney was trying to lure John back to their studio.
John is being asked this for his third time to come down and be a director at Disney, or he can stay up in Northern California with this company that's bordering on collapse because they're losing money. He stays up here with this company bordering on collapse.
John had an idea though for his own feature animated film, one from the perspective of toys. In 1991, he pitched his idea to Disney and they made a deal. With $26 million in funding, the team set off to create the world's first computer animated feature film.
To infinity and beyond!
Pixar knew that they wanted to be different from traditional Disney films. They wanted to create their own unique identity. The movie initially had some problems. There were a lot of changes, and Disney, specifically Katzenberg, pushed Pixar to make Toy Story edgy. This direction wasn't working though, and Woody came across as a real jerk.
Off the bed! You gonna make us, Woody? No. He is. Slinky! Slinky! Get up here and do your job! Are you deaf? I said take care of them!
I'm sorry, Woody, but I have to agree with them. I don't think what you did was right.
What? Am I hearing correctly? You don't think I was right? Who said your job was to think, Spring Wiener?
Well, I just thought that
use this vast reserve of brain power to consider this for a moment. If it wasn't for me, Andy wouldn't pay any attention to you at all. In fact, my sketchy friend, you would have been hauled away to Goodwill a long time ago, so shut your mouth and get them off the bed. Do it. Now.
The first storyboard of the movie was an absolute mess. It was so bad that Disney was considering shutting down production. Pixar went through a massive rewrite and decided to go with their guts. They drastically turned things around and showed the improved storyboard to Disney. They liked it, and things were back on track. On November 22nd, 1995, after 4 years of a challenging production, Toy Story finally made its debut. It was a massive success and grossed over $350 million and was the highest grossing movie of that year.
People began to realize that this was a big deal, that we in fact had hit our stride, and this was what we were destined to do.
Later that year, Pixar officially became a studio and went public. They did this due to the contract they had with Disney. Most of the money made from Toy Story went to Disney, and they also had rights to merchandising. Pixar realized that this was a big problem. If a movie flopped, the company would die. Through Steve Jobs, they were able to raise $150 million for the budding studio. Fortunately, in 1997, Disney was willing to renegotiate the contract. Pixar said that they wanted to be 50-50 partners, and Disney said, okay. The next movie for Pixar would be A Bug's Life. This was a new learning experience for the studio, but they happily took on the challenge.
There's a classic thing in business, which is the second product syndrome, if you will. And that is companies that have a really successful first product, but they don't quite understand why that product was so successful. And their ambitions grow and they get much more grandiose, and their second product fails. Believe it or not, Apple was one of those companies. The Apple II, Apple's first real product in the marketplace, was incredibly successful, and the Apple III was a dud. And so I lived through that, and I've seen a lot of companies not make it through that. My feeling was if we got through our second film, we'd make it.
Pixar was able to recapture the magic of Toy Story with A Bug's Life. On November 25th, 1998, the movie was released and was a success. In fact, it was the highest grossing film of 1998. This movie was also accompanied by the short film Jerry's Game. This was the beginning of a long-standing tradition of short films showing before Pixar's featured movie. Also, in 1998, they started to break ground for Pixar's Emeryville studio, the future home of the company. Problems were on the horizon though, as the 1997 contract would lead to conflict between Pixar and Disney. The 1997 contract was an improvement for Pixar, but there were some details that would come back to haunt them. One of those was Disney's right to produce sequels. They were pushing forward to release a direct-to-video sequel for Toy Story. It was eventually upgraded to be a theatrical release, and Pixar demanded that this film counts as one of the 3 films from their contract, but Disney refused. Pixar was able to get the movie back in their hands, but it was an absolute mess. The original premise, which Pixar was trying to salvage, wasn't what they wanted, and they desired to start over. Disney said it was too late, but Pixar decided to redo it anyway. In record time, John and his team reworked the entire script from the ground up. It was a huge turnaround, and the film was put back on track. And on November 24th, 1999, Toy Story 2 was released and was just as successful as the original.
Toy Story 2 was the pivotal moment in this company. It's when we actually defined who we were.
After the release of Toy Story 2, Disney said that they would not pursue any sequels even though they could contractually. The next few years would be one of growth for Pixar, but their relationship with Disney would remain tenuous at best. After crushing 3 successful films in a row, John Lasseter took a much-needed break. That left the seat open to his colleague. People were concerned about letting a new guy call the shots, but his idea for a movie had a lot of potential. Monsters, Inc. was a challenge for the studio. They had to master the art of fur, something they had never done prior to this movie. But Pixar took on the challenge, and in 2001, Monsters, Inc. was released.
I can't believe it.
Oh, Mike.
I was on TV! Ah, did you see me? I'm a natural!
Next was Finding Nemo. It too would feature a new director, Andrew Stanton. This also required the studio to learn water effects, something that was new territory for them. But Pixar accepted the challenge and took to it like a fish to water.
Something's wrong with you.
Finding Nemo was also a success, and the following movie, The Incredibles, would also be very successful. Pixar was releasing original movies at an amazing rate, and were increasing their artistic and technological skills along the way. They even got their own rides at Disney theme parks. As I said before, Pixar's relationship with Disney was tenuous at best. Michael Eisner, the CEO of Disney at the time, was not budging with the negotiations of the Pixar contract. Pixar wanted more money for the movies they made, but Eisner refused to yield. In 2004, the potential deal between the two broke down, and Pixar was publicly discussing about finding another company to partner with. Disney decided to open their own animation division called Circle 7 Animation. It was given the task of producing Toy Story 3, something that Pixar was not happy about.
Our belief is that since we created the characters, the original creators are the ones who should carry on with it and give them life. And to turn it over to somebody else for short-term economic gain just didn't make any sense. It was like turning over your children to somebody else. We were going to lose those characters.
This, my friends, is where things get interesting. I have a theory, but it's kind of complicated. Okay, here we go. We know the history of Pixar and how Disney tossed them a bone by collaborating on Toy Story. This led to an eventual contract between the two. During this time in the 90s, Disney was going through an animation renaissance under the leadership of Jeffrey Katzenberg, the future founder of DreamWorks Animation. He left Disney in 1994 and started DreamWorks as a competitive studio, one that would literally rip off Pixar. Katzenberg stole this idea from John Lasseter, and John was really upset about it. But Katzenberg came back at Disney in 1997 with a lawsuit saying that his forceful resignation at Disney broke contractual agreements. Disney settled out of court and gave Katzenberg $250 million. So, why am I mentioning this? Good question. Let me tie this all together. Katzenberg's drama with Eisner shook up the foundation of Disney's leadership that led to a continued decline of approval for Eisner to be CEO. A CEO who refused to find common ground with Pixar in 2004. But Eisner resigned as CEO in 2005, and the new CEO, Bob Iger, went back to Pixar to reopen talks.
For Disney to truly be successful in the future, we had to return to the glory days of animation. So I began focusing on how to do that, and it really begins with finding the right people. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Pixar had more of the right people than probably any other place in the world from an animation perspective. I then went to the opening of Hong Kong Disneyland in September, and the parade went by. It hit me that the characters that were in the parade all came from films that had been made prior to the mid-90s, except for some of the Pixar characters. I felt that I needed to think even more out of the box than I had been thinking, and I had a much greater sense of urgency. I became CEO October 1st. I called Steve around that time and said I thought we ought to talk. I had some bigger ideas. And that began a long period of discussion because it was very serious for both sides.
This eventually led to the perfect scenario. In 2006, Disney bought Pixar and gave them everything they wanted. So, Katzenberg, the guy who started DreamWorks, helped, in a way, to the eventual resignation of Michael Eisner. This allowed Pixar to negotiate with Bob Iger, a guy who understood Pixar and how they could help Disney as a company. That's right, DreamWorks saved Pixar.
You are a sad, strange little man, and you have my pity.
Yeah, this theory is far out, and there were years between the events. But I do believe that Katzenberg's departure from Disney shook up the leadership there and contributed to Michael Eisner's resignation. Something that needed to happen in order for Pixar to get back in the game. 2006 was the year where Pixar could sit down on their throne. They fought against the odds and finally reached a position of power that allowed them to make the movies they want without interference from Disney.
This changed the equation dramatically. And in the end, with weighing everything, we came to the conclusion that the best thing we could do was to join up with Disney.
The following movies were released after the Disney acquisition: Cars in 2006, Ratatouille in 2007, WALL-E in 2008, Up in 2009, Toy Story 3 in 2010, Cars 2 in 2011, Brave in 2012, Monsters University in 2013, Inside Out in 2015, The Good Dinosaur in 2015, Finding Dory in 2016, and Cars 3 in 2017. Despite releasing some films that were lackluster, Pixar has maintained an impressive track record. Their movies are always technical marvels, and they continue to advance the field of computer animation. The credit scene for The Good Dinosaur feature backgrounds that look identical to real life. Pixar has come a long way since Toy Story. Also, the movies continue to be financially successful. Heck, the Cars franchise is one of the most popular toy brands in the world. One of the conditions of the 2006 acquisition was putting John Lasseter and Ed Catmull in charge of Disney's own animation studio. For John, this was basically going full circle. He worked for Disney back in the day, was fired by them, then worked as a partner, and now is the chief creative officer of Disney Animation. This was a godsend for the studio, as it was severely struggling at the time. John and his team intervened though, and helped to get the studio back on track. Actually, they saved it. Some Disney executives thought that having two studios was redundant, but John refused to let that happen. He said, "We weren't going to let that closure happen on our watch. We were determined to save the legacy of Walt Disney's amazing studio and bring it back to the creative level it had to be. Saving this heritage was squarely on our shoulders." With that, they rehired some of the animators from the Disney Renaissance. This boosted the morale of the fledgling studio and helped them to regain their footing. Also, it was made abundantly clear that there would be no exchange of ideas or favors between the studios. John and Ed want both of them to keep their unique flavors and ideas. Obviously, this worked out terrifically for Disney. Not only do they get to enjoy the profits from Pixar, but now their own studio is back up on their feet, producing films that rival even Pixar. Overall, Pixar has a reputation that is unlike anyone else. They trailblaze new technologies and dare to take a leap of faith. They constantly fought to maintain their integrity as creators, despite the easy money they could have made. They went against the norm with their stories and produced movies that were strange but unique. And they saved the legacy of Walt's Animation Studio, a rival that they could have held animosity against, but instead revered. Pixar redefined the world of animation, but always continued to maintain a level of integrity and class, despite being masters of their craft. They have the attitudes of students, knowing that there is always room for improvement.
The foundation of Pixar is that art challenges technology and technology inspires the art.
And that is why Pixar is one of the greatest animation studios of all time. Hey guys, just wanted to say thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, give it a like and leave a comment down below. You can subscribe for more future videos and check out my other stuff if you want. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.